Yo, what is going on, guys? Welcome back to another video. Today, written up one of my favorite things to talk about is we go back in the time machine. We're going to look back at beginning of last league, figure out what were the most popular league starters from 3.21, how they transitioned to 3.22, how they felt in that last league, and just what I'm kind of watching out for with patch notes coming up in a couple of days. I have not really put another build guides together yet, but this is giving me my starting point, and I can kind of figure out what we should be looking for as meta shakeups in the new league to come. So before we jump into this, if you like the content, remember to click the like button down below and click on the subscribe button for a bunch of 3.22 content coming up. And let's just jump into this video. And it's gonna be a quick one. Not a ton to talk about, but it's stuff that I go through every day. Probably look at these charts. So let's figure this out. So why are we doing this? Why is this important to me? So I use this as part of my league start testing. Use all your resources when you're league start testing, trying to figure out something new. I like to see what's popular. Basically, league start builds can run on minimal budget, can do all the content in the game, and can make you more currency for your next build. So that's super important for league starts. I'm using the entire community collectively to collect stats and figure out what the best league starters were last league. And then I use this kind of for guide making and then kind of what I want to start testing. Honestly, the real reason we're doing this is there's nothing else to do before patch notes. There's nothing new to test. There's nothing to think about. There's no theory crafting to do. We've pretty much got this meta figured out. Alright, so where do I get my information from? This is from PoE Ninja. If you're not familiar with PoE Ninja, make sure to go check it out. I'm bring it up in a second here. Basically, I roll back. You can roll back to certain times. I'm going to roll back to the first 3 days of the league. This gives us a really great breakdown of what was popular 3 days into the league. You can sort by skill. Kind of gives you a list of people at their level, what skill they're using as their 6th link. And the last thing I do with this, I look for overlaps. So you'll see some skills that are very similar, kind of use the same basic items, trees, and I kind of combine those together. So when I get into the top 5 list here in a second, and you say, hey, this one was actually number 3, you have number 2, it's because I combined it with another skill that was extremely similar. And that's just kind of what I came up with. So let's take a look at PoE Ninja. This is kind of what we're working with. So in Time Machine, I set this back to day 3. Usually gives me a good idea of what people are doing for league starters. And then I sort by main skills, and you kind of see what the main skills were here. These are anything that had more than a 5 link. So it was actually pretty balanced. There wasn't anything crazy standing out, but there were definitely some standout archetypes that we're going to touch on in the presentation now. First of which is, of course, Cold Dot. Cold Dot has been around for quite a long time now. I think it's probably the most popular hardcore solo self-found race build. It's extremely tanky, has built-in defenses with just being a cold skill. It's chilling, freezing all the time. I want to touch on the classes that's used on this. Is basically used on a ton of classes, but the most popular ones, at least in Trade League, were Elementalist, Occultist, Trickster, Scion. Elementalist and Occultist basically because we're getting the less defensive classes in Trade League. Trickster would probably be the more defensive option, and it was 3rd popular. Basically, this is a super easy setup. Screen on the bottom left there is basically your Cold Dot setup. You throw stuff on the ground. You're basically using 3 Cold Dot skills: Vortex, Creeping Frost, and Cold Snap. Combining all of these, you're just basically spamming all of your Cold Dot spells all the time, so you're just getting multiple stacks of Cold Dot. Basically, none of your stuff, none of the enemies move because they're chilled or frozen, and that's pretty much the build. It's pretty boring playstyle. I've played this before. Wasn't a huge fan, but it definitely does a trick. Your damage is capped because of the dot ability. Capped by the dot cap, but that's way more than enough to do all the content in the game. I did find this build a little bit slowish. Basically, your movement skill is Frostblink, and you're playing Elementalist, Occultist, not the quickest characters by nature, but it's perfectly fine. You can do all the content in the game. Next up is Lightning Arrow. I kind of just coupled this into bow builds in general. So this is most popular on Deadeye, Raider, and Campion. That'd be Champion. So Deadeye was by far the most popular though. Just because, more projectile good, right? More fun. Basically, this is your archetype. That's just a zoomer bow build. So we have Raider and Deadeye just zooming around the map, clicking button, screen go boom, everything's clear. The downside of this build is not tanky. So basically, you're playing a don't get hit build. It does work out on League Start basically. The one downside you'll see with these builds is they sometimes struggle with boss damage. A lot of them if you start using Artillery Ballista, so you'll see if you search by Lightning Arrow, you also will get a bunch of Artillery Ballista builds because they're using 2 5 links or 2 6 links. And then this I want to point out this one's a little bit different than other builds in this list because this basically scales with your bow damage and not with your level. So having a good bow is more important than having scaling your gems and level and stuff like that. Overall fun build. I'm considering this for League Starter. Been testing it. Just been really fun so far. Next I'm going to talk about Toxic Rain. Specifically, it's going to be Toxic Rain Ballista. I think it was the most popular version of Toxic Rain by a long shot last league. This was played on mainly Pathfinder and Champion. It seemed like Pathfinder was super strong. I would not be surprised if it gets a slight nerf to how its flasks work. It seemed really, really strong. Champion just is always good. You're going to see Champion pop up a bunch here. So the downside of this build is a Ballista playstyle. Good or bad. Some people really like it. Some people dislike it. There you go. I league start tested it last league. I league test started it again this league. And I felt the same way both times, that it was really, really good. I could not stand the playstyle though. So the way this build works, you place a totem down, then it fires, and then it does ground degen, and then the ground degen does damage. So if you take that, you're basically 3 steps away from when you click the button to doing damage. It feels a little bit weird. It does a lot of damage though, and it's super easy to play. Basically, if you get phasing, move speed, you're just dropping totem, keep moving, and hope everything behind you died. It's super good though. It's extremely easy to level. Basically, this build online starting at like Act 6. Doesn't require any uniques. Some uniques make it better. Scales great with attack speed and a gem level, of course, again. This is also limited by the dot cap of how much damage you can actually do, but again, the dot cap is far enough damage to do all the content in the game. Number 2 is Boneshatter. This is actually probably the only skill on this list I don't have experience with playing. I don't play melee. It's like slam skills got nerfed a long time ago. This was played on Jug and Slayer. Basically, Boneshatter is just a very tanky, probably the only good melee skill in the game. I know someone else is going to jump in the comments and say, hey, this melee skill I played to level 100 and it was super good, but this is the only meta melee skill, I think. So it's very tanky, burst damage. The way Boneshatter works is you actually attack and you get trauma stacks. We've already seen like a kind of a teaser of basically the trauma stacks becoming a support gem in 3.22. I'm going to assume that's a nerf to Boneshatter somehow, or every other melee skill is just getting better, because this was basically the reason you played Boneshatter. Those trauma stacks would ramp up, making you deal a ton more physical damage. That's basically the gist of Boneshatter. Downside to Boneshatter is it's melee, needs a weapon, needs a pretty strong physical damage weapon to feel good, and it's a little bit slowish. That's basically how melee feels in general, though, in my opinion. And the number 1 league starter from last league. I kind of coupled a few of them together, but by far and away, it was Righteous Fire, Fire Trap, Frost Blink, Ignite. I kind of just coupled them all together in here. These are mainly played on Jug for the Righteous Fire, and Elementalist if you're doing Frost Blink, Fire Trap stuff. Both were extremely good. Someone's gonna tell me that like those aren't the same builds. They're pretty much the same builds. You're just figuring out different ways to do your AoE damage as you walk. One's doing Frost Blink, one's doing Righteous Fire. And then you're using Fire Trap to kill bosses, so convince me otherwise that they're not the same. But it's the same but different. So these are both fire dot builds in general. There's many different flavors, as I mentioned, kind of like the 2 that we're seeing here, Righteous Fire and Frostblink Fire Trap. So this is a very, very good build. First of all, you're going to hit the dot cap super easily. Downside of this build is it traps. A lot of people don't like playing trap builds. You just throw a trap, it explodes, it does damage over time. This build scales super hard with gem level, so again, we're looking to hit the dot cap by scaling our gem up, and I think you've probably seen the problems, or at least the consistencies with all these builds so far. So, but again, really good build. I actually played this. This was going to be a league starter if they didn't introduce Val Absolution last league, so keep that in mind. This was actually pretty fun to play. I definitely recommend testing it out. Alright, lastly, I want to talk about what to look out for in the patch notes coming up. I think one thing I look out for is dot nerfs, if they change the way dot damage works at all in this game. 3 of the builds here were completely dot-based builds that scale with gem level. If it's the second thing else here is gem level scaling changes. These are the 2 big things I'm going to look out for in the patch notes. I think those hurt the most. The last thing I'm going to look out for is actually buffs. It seems like, I think we're in line with some buffs. So either we're getting some new support gems, putting trauma stacks on skills, as has been already announced. As a support, I think it's probably going to help strike skills a lot and other melee skills instead of everybody just playing Boneshatter. I really am hoping that we get buffs. Basically, people play dot builds at League Start now because they're super easy to scale and you don't need much investment. If we had better skills, we wouldn't be doing that. So hopefully we just get some buffs. I know it might be some copium, but there you go. Anyways, if you wait out this long, thank you for watching. Appreciate it a lot. Remember to click like, subscribe, do all that stuff. We'll be live streaming League Start testing basically every day until League launches, and then check out the Twitch link down below as well. Other than that, thanks for watching. Have a great day.